Welcome to the Elliott Confidential podcast. I'm Christopher Elliott. I'm here with my boy, Aren Elliott.
It's your boy.
It's your boy. How are you, Aren?
I'm tired.
Really?
Yeah. Been a really long past couple of days doing finals, so yeah. Tired.
Burnout. Yeah. And I'm just getting over, I don't even know what I had, but I had like at least 4 separate illnesses coming back from Quito. So we are in Santiago, Chile.
Or as they say here, Chile.
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 Yes. Is that a TCH? Chile.
Chile.
Anyway, we got here on, I want to say a Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah.
We've been here Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm losing track of the days from Quito. And the last place we were at was a place called Mosh Lodge. We will talk about Mosh Lodge in just a second.
The Mosh Pit Lodge.
The Mosh Pit Lodge. Oh. And we will also talk about Santiago, although we haven't been here for that long, because I know that a lot of folks are thinking about, getting away from winter, maybe coming down to some place where it's summery-er, if that's even a word. It is much more summery here. It is the middle of frickin' summer. And that actually brings us to this week's question, which is, we've talked about different types of weather that you can encounter when you're traveling, and our last question of the week was on sickness, and we're going to read your comments in a minute on that. But I'm curious about seasonal shock. Have you ever gone from summer to winter, winter to summer, spring to fall? We just went from essentially winter to right now being in the middle of the summer, and so our days have gone from what were the days that we were getting 8 hours, 7 hours of daylight to now we're getting, it seems like 15 hours of daylight.
Mm-hmm. Especially when we were in Spokane.
Oh gosh, yeah, we were getting 2 hours of daylight in Spokane. So anyway, tell us about the time when maybe you had a seasonal change like this when you were traveling, and what the most noteworthy part of it was and how you dealt with it. And that can either be going from the middle of summer to the middle of winter, or the middle of winter to the middle of summer. I think for us, Aren, one of the weirdest transitions that we ever had was in Norway. When we went, it was summertime, but we went up to Norway and then we had 24 hours of daylight.
Yeah. I remember how that was like, and the craziest part about it was that we had all that daylight, and meanwhile it was maybe a high of 8 degrees Celsius, which is 50 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it was
so
not
it
warm.
was summer, but then it was also very wintry. And then also when we went to Antarctica earlier this year, it was summer. But it was a winter destination.
It was a wintry summer.
Yeah, and you expect Antarctica to be super cold, but it got to 23 degrees.
And really,
it
was impossible to sleep on the ship because unless you closed all the curtains, because it was light all the time. Mm-hmm. We had some amazing comments on last week's question, which is about tell us the last time you got sick on a trip, because it turns out a lot of you guys got sick too, and I cannot wait to read those. But since we were in the Galapagos, I will just preview one, because Lori had a really interesting comment. She said that the sickest that she's been was when she was in the Galapagos, like us. She said she landed in Quito and she went to the hotel, and an hour later got horrific altitude sickness. She says, I couldn't even crawl to the phone to call the front desk. And then it became high altitude cerebral edema, called HACE or H, I don't know, which she said can be deadly.
Yeah, wow.
Which I can easily believe that would have happened, because Quito is just that high up. So anyway, that's we'll do the rest of the comments in a minute.
Yeah.
But we should talk about the Mosh Lodge, because you saw more of it than I did, because you were in a better place. I actually slept through most of Mosh Lodge because I was so sick. So for 2 straight days I was in bed. Mm-hmm. So what did you think of Mosh Lodge?
So Mosh Lodge is interesting. It's in the middle of the rainforest. It's a 3-hour drive, more than 3-hour drive from Quito.
Down a very winding, bumpy road.
Yes, exactly. And it's a little bit of a strange place to have a hotel. Here, let me pull it up here. Yeah, it's really in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't even show you.
It doesn't even show a road.
It doesn't even show a road going there. So, yeah, it's crazy. And in any case, it's interesting because it's interesting because the demographic target for this place is very different from even the Galapagos. They're looking at people who want to go hike in not really the Amazon, but it's a rainforest. It's a cloud forest.
And they're not easy hikes. We ended up doing one our last day there. I pulled myself out of bed, and we walked in a creek, along a creek, and then took a cable car up the hill. So it was, these are not easy hikes. If you're on a cruise and you're just a leisurely type, you do not want to do this.
No, exactly. So there are a lot of intense hikes, but also there are these cable cars that will take you across the Amazon. So that way,
it's the
cloud forest.
It's the Ecuadorian cloud forest, or it's not the Amazon.
It's not the Amazon. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
But anyway, it'll take you across the rainforest. We'll call it that. And it's really interesting. They have a lot of biodiversity, a lot of species that they've discovered there. In terms of the experience being there, though, it is very luxury. You have a dehumidifier in your room. Everything is AC. And they have super thick doors to make sure nothing gets in. You have also a perfect view of the forest, which means you get to see all the birds from your hotel room.
Floor-to-ceiling windows. Yeah, very beautiful. We saw birds flying into our window, and we saw them flying around our window. Beautiful. These are the type of birds that you go out bird watching to see, and they're right there. Beautiful, green and blue birds, brilliant blue birds, and spider monkeys.
Yes, so we got to see some monkeys there too. It's actually only once that I saw it, but I think you might have seen it twice.
Well, I was having a fever, so I saw it more times than that probably was out there. But yeah. Anyway, the biodiversity was pretty amazing. They had just discovered a couple of years ago something called the Mashpee glass frog. And the glass frog is a small translucent animal, comes out at night, and you can see through. You can see right through to its organs. It is just the most amazing thing. We didn't actually see it. We saw a photo of it, but it's out there.
It is,
and you can only find it in this area. So, who would you recommend should maybe book a room at the Mashpee Lodge, Aren?
Well, I think that if you have the means, and if you're interested in, hiking through the rainforest and seeing a lot of biodiversity, I think that this is really the place for you. If you're interested in more of a leisurely, sitting by the poolside and drinking a margarita, this is not the place for you.
I agree with you. And actually I have a story in Forbes today on eco-lodges, and Mashpee is prominently featured in there, but I have many other eco-lodges that I've talked to for the article. And it turns out that eco-lodges are a really big thing. They're a huge trend for 24. A lot of people are interested in booking them. There are a lot of lodges that are calling themselves eco-lodges, but they're not true eco-lodges. But this is the thing, is that there really isn't a commonly accepted definition of an eco-lodge. So I can call myself an eco-lodge here in Santiago. I'm living in an eco-lodge here, and there's no eco-lodge police that can come by and say, this is not a true eco-lodge. But, it really isn't an eco-lodge. I'm staying in an apartment in the city. But anyway, you get my point, right?
Yeah, I get your point. It's definitely something that's a really emergent sort of trend in travel, these eco-lodges. And I think it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what sort of services and promises these eco-lodges can make, and if there will be any standards set forward.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there are certain things that people expect when they stay at an eco-lodge. They expect it to be committed to protecting the environment. Carbon neutrality is really important. Exploring the environment, maybe having a guide there. And then some off-the-grid amenities. People do expect things like internet access and electricity. But they also don't want it to be leaving a really huge carbon footprint, so they expect recycling and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So from Lodge, we headed back to Quito and then flew down here. And we went from kind of the tropical rainforesty high altitude to a very different climate. Aren, describe the climate, please, here.
So Santiago is essentially a desert. It's really not even like, oh, LA is a desert. No, it's like, Palm Springs sort of desert. It's really warm here. It's been the high of 29 Celsius, or it's something like 90 something. It's a little bit, almost 90
It's a
Fahrenheit.
dry heat, though.
It's a dry heat. It's a dusty place. It reminds me a little bit of Reno during the summer. But other than that, that's where the similarities end. Actually, you get quite striking view of the Andes Mountains here,
That's so
which is
beautiful.
really incredible.
I couldn't believe it when I saw, you pointed it out, we were out walking and you said, hey, look, Dad, there are the Andes, or the Andes. I was shocked. There they were, the mountains, there was snow on the peaks. It reminded me a lot of being in Fort Collins, Colorado, where this was a couple of years ago. You're there in the middle of the summer, it's warm and beautiful, and you look at the Rocky Mountains, and there, right where Rocky Mountain National Park is there's these snow-capped peaks. It's really, really beautiful.
Yeah, and so you get to see that if you're along the river here, which the river is really nice here in Santiago. But you get to see these mountains, mountains everywhere, but these snow-capped mountains, they're really amazing to look at. And I think that it's a really special thing to be able to see that in a place that is so, it's such a desert almost.
Yeah, and it's so warm too. You don't expect to see a snow-capped mountain when it's this warm.
Yeah.
What are your overall impressions of Santiago?
Well, Santiago, I don't know what I was expecting, but Santiago is really nice. It reminds me of Greece, South Africa, a little bit of
That's not
split
necessarily
Croatia.
a good thing.
It's a lot of different elements from
Yeah.
these places. And it also reminds me a little bit of Western Colorado, I would say. So there's a lot of different sort of elements around here. What do I think of Santiago overall? It's been really good to us so far. And I think that I'm looking forward to exploring more of the city because this is a walkable town. It's much more walkable than some other places we've stayed.
More walkable than Quito, for sure.
Yes. So I'm so far really happy with Santiago. We've been walking around we've been walking by the river, and then there's also a metropolitan park with a little gondola, and it also has a bunch of hiking trails there. So when we're walking distance from that, which is really nice because it means that we get to go hiking.
So imagine that you're someone listening to this podcast right now. The snow is piling up outside, and they're thinking to themselves, I need to get somewhere warm. To whom would you recommend a place like Santiago?
Santiago is surprisingly within reach. I didn't realize it, but it's only about 8 hours from Texas. I would think
By plane, yeah.
by plane, because it was 4 hours to Quito and then another real 3.5 hours here. So if you're going from a place like Texas, and I imagine from other parts of the United States, it's really not that big of a deal. And you can come down to a place like Santiago, and it's summer here. The prices are, the prices are not, super low, but
No, this is not Argentina prices.
it's not, no.
No.
But you're going to get a good deal.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot to see in Santiago. I feel like the amount of tourism from Americans, I don't see it. Not in the same way that I see American tourists coming to Europe, for example. So it's not a huge market, and I think that adds to the authenticity of the experience too.
Well said, yeah. I have not seen very many Americans at all. In fact, I haven't met any Americans here yet. They may be in other places like Valparaiso or in other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. We'll have to go there to see. We're going to be searching for American tourists. But so far, yeah, can you imagine? Is anyone here American? Are you guys American? No. There's a lot, though. There's a lot going on. I know that a lot of Americans go farther south.
Yeah, they go to see Patagonia
and go hiking there.
The southern Andes.
And that, because Chile is such a long country, like it's actually a driving destination. We were talking to the tourism folks today, and they said if you come here, we usually would rent a car and drive down to Patagonia, which we may end up doing at some point if we have the time. We're still not sure what we're going to do next because our next destination actually is Argentina, but Argentina is not doing so well right now. They just had a very controversial election, and they're having some economic issues. So if the security situation is not what we hoped it to be, we might stay here a little longer. I just don't know what we're going to do, but we'll see. Anyway, to be continued. I think that there's much more to explore here, and we will get back to you next week with much more about I was going to say Patagonia, but certainly about Chile and Santiago. Last week's question was, what's the sickest that you've ever gotten when you've traveled? And the reason that we asked that question was that we ourselves had been sick. Aren, can you get us up to speed on how sick we did get?
Yeah, so we were super sick. We couldn't move for a couple of days. I mean, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but the moment we arrived, we have been tracking our health with these new watches, and at the moment we arrived, our health was sort of deteriorating, and then eventually we got altitude sick the first day, and altitude sickness in the sense that our blood oxygen was low, and that really wasn't very helpful. Then we made it to the Galapagos, and we got sick there with a new, maybe it was a virus or a bacteria.
Something going around on the ship, right?
Yes. And then we got this stomach bug, which was separate because we had just had cold symptoms up to that point, and then we got a stomach bug. And then we went back, and we got altitude sickness again.
Yeah.
And then there was this other lung sort of congestion thing that was different from the cold.
Oh, I got that. Yeah, that was bad.
Yeah, you got that.
I remember being in a meeting with someone who was doing communications for the tour operator, Metropolitan Touring, and finally I just said, I have to stop this meeting. I have to go to sleep because I can't do this anymore. And I feel terrible about that, but Dominic, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry that I had to leave our meeting, but I'm better now. Anyway, that's why we asked the question, and boy, did we get answers. We've already previewed one of them, but we have more. DJ says that he got COVID on a Viking River cruise. Says all was good at the start, but by the end of the cruise, 90% of passengers had COVID. One was taken off the ship in an ambulance. That is not the way you want to end a cruise at all. Jane says, my husband got horrible Montezuma's revenge in Cozumel. We were on a scuba lunch on a beach adventure, and I warned him about eating the salads. He learned.
Oh, goodness.
He learned. Connie says, here's a story much closer to home. In 1983, my future husband and I flew to Minneapolis for a long weekend and tickets to the Guthrie Theater. That first afternoon, we ate lunch at a deli. Uh-oh, I can tell where this is going. I had a corned beef sandwich. 4 hours later, and while we were at a restaurant prior to the performance at the Guthrie, I came down with a sudden attack of food poisoning. I swear it was from the corned beef sandwich. No Guthrie, no wandering around Minneapolis, no fun. Just a reminder that you don't have to be in a different country to eat something that you shouldn't. Well said, Connie. Well said.
C. Womack says, the sickest I've ever been was the ferry boat ride to the Great Barrier Reef. 40 minutes from mainland Australia of torturous wind, high waves, and mist made me seasick beyond any previous time. Nothing helped. Of course, once on the reef, had to make return trip to mainland. So sick. Awful. Wow.
Oh, Aaron, I remember one time we were down in the Florida Keys and we went on a boat. And I had warned you not to eat breakfast. Do you remember that? And you ate it anyway, and oh man, you got so seasick and you lost it. It was all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, not good. Stacy says, I was stung by a scorpion in Thailand. Got a trip to the hospital in Chiang Mai. Hey, we've been to Chiang Mai.
Yeah.
They have a good Starbucks right across from the gate there. In Chiang Mai.
Yeah.
Patricia says, we went to Ecuador in September of 2018 with a Stanford University tour. We flew from San Francisco to Quito. We cruised the Galapagos on La Pinta. Back to Quito and then to the Mashpi Lodge. Hey, that's where we were. Fortunately, we were healthy the entire trip. Wait a minute. That's not a comment. The Mashpi Lodge, she says, was amazing. Great hikes, tours, wonderful meals. Water shoes were essential, both in the islands and Mashpi, which, is, we were saying that too. I'm glad you didn't get sick, Patricia. That's good. Moy says, does an injury count? Does an injury count? It does, because I talked about my ski injury. The second and third week of a trip to Ghana, I fell into a roadside drainage ditch. Oh no. Nothing was broken, but my knee had a bad gash that needed surgery. I spent the rest of the trip cleaning the wound and fighting infections. Ugh, that's the last place you want to have an infection too. May says, I had a UTI that nearly went septic in St. Martin. Oh, that's terrible. That's really terrible. DW says, whole family got food poisoning on a December 2006 Windjammer cruise in the Caribbean. That's bad. That's worse than what we got. Denise says, another food poisoning story. Wow, we should have just had a question about food poisoning. Something I ate before boarding a flight from Paris to Atlanta. That's surprising because Paris usually has very sanitary, good food. Denise says, I was sick the entire plane ride and literally sat on the floor trudging through customs. Oh. Yeah, and I know, and Sharon says that's my nightmare, is being sick on a plane, especially in a long flight like that. Paris to Atlanta is a long flight, but we've been on longer flights. Can you imagine Tokyo to Los Angeles or something like that?
Yeah, that's
or
nuts.
Sydney to Los Angeles and you get food poisoning.
It's Sydney to London.
Jerry says got food poisoning while on a European river cruise in 2009. About half the ship got food poisoning as well. This week's question, on a cheerier note, is tell us about the time when you went from summer to winter or winter to summer, a light or climate shock, like where you went from getting 4 hours of daylight to suddenly getting 18 hours of daylight or even 24 hours of daylight. Tell us about that. We would love to hear it, about your climate surprise stories while you're traveling. We have a few to tell too. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. And we will be in we'll be in Santiago again next week, I guess.
Yeah, Santiago next week is the 23rd, so almost Christmas Day.
I know. All right.
What's
Ciao.
actually the 24th?
Ciao, everybody.